just have one question. I was
Sure.
reading Bertrand Russell's book, The Problems of Philosophy, and in his chapter, Our Knowledge of General Principles, he mentions a priori. So he talks about logical principles and the principle of induction, deduction, and the principle of inference, and all everything is fine. But then he speaks about ethics and how for example, how humans want to be happy. That is a priori, or how humans want to extend their lifespan. That's a priori. So my question is, can humans derive objective moral values from a priori, such as these that he mentioned? That's the only question I have. Thank you.
Could you rephrase that in a in a perhaps different way? I didn't quite understand what you were trying to say there.
So it's he meant like in his chapter he talks about a priori in ethics. So my
Right.
question is, can a person, for example, who doesn't believe in religion, let's say for example an atheist, he says, hang on, hey, look at these things that are a priori, and we can say that this is objectively moral because of this being a priori. This, for example, we want to be
Yeah.
happier as human beings. We can derive.
Okay.
That's my question.
So, firstly, I'm not aware of what you're referring to in terms of the part of the book, Problems of Philosophy. I remember going through it many years ago, and it's a bit. I think I gave up at some point.
It's a small book. I think I remember what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But basically Bertrand Russell has to, like, he came at a time where logical positivism was quite strong. Don't forget the Vienna Circle, logical positivism. That's why one of his students was Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he had a theory of language, and he developed it. In the beginning, he had the Tractatus, and then he went over and developed another theory. But the point is that the logical positivist school, for the most part, they saw ethics as belonging to a class of meta-ethics, which were basically meaningless. So this verificationism or positivism became redundant. After about the 30s or 40s, when there's an interview of A.J. Ayer.
70s.
Is that one interview? Did you see it? Yeah, where he basically realizes the mistakes that he made.
It's self-refuting.
And he's self-refuting and so on. Yeah, so these kinds of arguments, I'm not sure if he actually formally made an argument that it's meaningless in the Problems of Philosophy, but he did say that, ethics belongs to a category of, metaphysics, and therefore it's not demonstratable. It's not knowledge in the same way as something which is. But remember, Bertrand Russell tried many different things. One of the things that Bertrand Russell tried with Frege is to equate logic and mathematics, and this was one of the biggest projects that he had. And then he realized, this is all an experiment in the early 20th century, because he realized that that's not possible, that they were two separate things. So there are two kind of failed experiments, if you want to call them that, in the early 20th century. One of them was this experiment was to try and link mathematics to logic, and to say that almost that they're one and the same thing. And then they came and literally retracted their statements afterwards. And the other thing that was a failed experiment was positivism and verificationism. These are two failed experiments. It's pretty standard now for people to realize that it's, like you said, self-refuting. It's not. So they're saying that anything which is a priori knowledge rather than a posteriori. So in this case, we're talking about meta-ethics. We're talking about things which we don't a priori before the event or posteriori after the event. Here we're talking about things which are kind of in the mind, right? So he's saying that anything which is abstract in this sense and not extracted through sense datum, is something which is not extracted through sense datum. It's something which is meaningless. I don't know if this was his formal view in that book, but this was certainly popular. So once again, if that were to be the case, then that view itself would be redundant, or the view that meta-ethics is meaningless would itself be meaningless. Then you'd have like infinite regresses of meaningless statements. And this is why logical positivism. You can watch it's really interesting. It's online. You can find the AJ Ayo and Brian Mabby, his name is. That guy it's a guy that there's the show that they sit together and they talk about philosophy. I think his name is Brian Mabby and AJ Ayo. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but they're sitting together. And he's kind of like retracting a lot of the stuff that he used to believe in, because he was seen as one of the forerunners in the early 20th centuries in terms of positivism.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's my. Actually, I have a small question, a quick small question. So it was still about the book also. In the book, he was talking about, for example, how the principle of induction and the principle of inference, for example, they're principles that cannot be proven, since proof presupposes them, but they cannot also be disproven. Yeah.
The axioms. Yeah, it's called axioms. That we're talking about, like in the base of mathematics, you have axioms and theorems. These are what at the base of, like, how do you prove that AB equals BA? How do you prove that? There's no formal way of proving what's AB equals BA. There's no formal way of proving that. So it's an axiomatic statement, which means that there's no proof for it, but you have to believe in it in order to do any kind of mathematics.
Yeah.
And so these are the kinds of things that, like I said, Frege and Russell were struggling with, and they wanted answers to, but they couldn't get the answers that they wanted to.
Okay, I see. Okay, so basically, I don't want to, have a long question, but I was trying to see if, for example, a Christian, if he, for example, would say, well, because for example, the principle of inference or the principle of logic of non-contradiction, it's not proven, so you can't use it to debunk the Trinity.
But they'll be making a logical argument there, isn't it?
Yeah. So basically, because I have this self-argumentation a lot. With myself to see, like, all the possible angles and views that I might run into. So my end conclusion was basically this person would have to be like like Nietzsche, for example. You'd have to not believe in anything.
Look, if someone says this, then you've cornered them already, because at the end of the day, we have rational faculties, right? And we're reasoning. And if these two things were not in place, then any conversation would be redundant from the very beginning. There would be no conversation. Then any postulation is meaningless, because if we're saying there are no rules to dictate truth and falsehood, or to dictate something which is corresponding with reality and something which is not, there are no rules of such, then any claim you make is meaningless. Even the claim that you make that there are no rules will be meaningless. And so it will be the most self-refuting thing. You cannot do anything after that. You've basically shot yourself in the foot. But what we do say as Muslims or as theists is we say that you cannot explain rational faculties. You cannot explain them on a naturalistic worldview and an atheistic worldview. Or the question we would ask atheists or naturalists is, how do you explain them on a naturalistic worldview? Because as you do, like you do the evolutionary stuff, so there's no evolutionary reason why truth is preferred over falsehood, for example. Yeah. So once again, and you can add to this, but from my understanding is that, theism offers a very plausible explanation for why rationality exists in the first place.
Yeah.
A, and B, why there is such a thing as logic and these rules of inference or whatever it may be. It offers, and namely that there is a knowledge that endows such creatures or such sentient beings with those things.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And I think something else to take away from this, it's quite good that Hijab went over the history, is to show that even if there's a strong consensus, and it's very difficult to get a consensus, but in a way, the logical positivists and those after them, they did have a very big following. So I guess you can say that they did have a quasi consensus in some regards, especially with the Western world. However, the idea turned out to be basically ludicrous, right? Self-refuting, essentially. And it just goes to show again that, you know, something may be picking up and people are agreeing with it and everyone else is agreeing with it and it's going really, really far, then it can come crashing down. And I think that's very important. And it's kind of linked to the, you know, the whole point about the fitra and how we shouldn't, you know, if somebody comes with an argument and it's just all about arguments, how actually these things can, you know, you can have consensus for a long time, but those arguments can completely fail. Another very good example is actually the example of justified true belief, right? The sort of idea that to have knowledge, something has to be justified, has to be true, and you have to believe it. And then obviously Edmund Gettier came in the 60s and then just completely smashed that whole idea. So that consensus about justified true belief existed for around 2,000 years in Western philosophy. And all it really took is one philosopher to come in the 1960s and it's completely gone now, right? So I think it's very important that these philosophical movements, which they look like juggernauts at times, which are unstoppable, how they can just come completely crashing down.
True. Okay, no, that's great. You guys answered my question.